Hey folks, so today we're going to discuss the three refuges. What are they and what might they mean to us, particularly within a secular context? Hi folks, so I'm Doug Smith. I'm the study director at the Secular Buddhist Association, that's secularbuddhism.org. And today we're going to discuss a bit about the three refuges. And if you're interested in helping to make the world a wiser, a kinder, and a less stressful place to be, I hope you'd consider subscribing to Doug's Secular Dharma. You can do that below or in various buttons and badges around. We'll aim to have one of these talks out roughly every week on Mondays, discussing some aspect of early Buddhism, of secular Buddhism, secularism, and related kinds of topics. So we're going to discuss the three refuges today. Now, what are they? So many of you will be familiar with them, but if you're not, many traditional and some secular Buddhists repeat or take what's called the three refuges. That is to say, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dhamma, and I take refuge in the Sangha. These can be said also in Pali: Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, and Sangham saranam gacchami. Those are the Pali phrases that go along with them. And you may have heard those as well. Now, where do these come from? They don't really go back to the earliest texts. They, I think, sprung up within later on, within a more strictly religious context. But in the early texts, at the end of many of the suttas, the people with whom the Buddha is conversing will say that they take refuge in him as their teacher, that the Buddha will be their teacher for the rest of their lives. And this is a way of taking refuge. So the concept of refuge within the Buddha Dharma goes back quite a long way. Arguably goes back to the original teachings. Basically, you think of it in the context of that area of India, that epoch of India, where you have a large number of competing philosophies or religions, however you want to call them, belief systems. And there was, it's fair to say, a certain amount of competition between them for followers, for believers, both because obviously the Buddha wanted to get across what he believed was the healthiest and best way to approach the world, but also one can't leave aside the point that the Buddha, by gaining followers, was attempting to create a kind of a movement that would both make the world a better place, but also support him and the Sangha, that is to say the monastic community. And the monastic community relied upon lay support for food, for lodging, for clothing, and for medicine exclusively. So taking refuge to that extent meant supporting this kind of monastic community as well, if it wasn't actually becoming monastic oneself. So the first of these refuges is refuge in the Buddha. Now, what exactly does that mean? It can mean many things, certainly within a religious context. It's understanding the Buddha as a kind of a quasi-superhuman kind of being. But within a secular context, I think we can understand refuge in the Buddha as well as understanding him or his place as the goal of practice. Okay, it's keeping our minds open to the possibility of really achieving a kind of perfected wisdom, a kind of perfected kindness, and a kind of emptiness of stress, which is what we're aiming at. Now, I don't know whether this is actually possible for humans, for us, for anything within, this blooming, buzzing confusion of a world. But I think there is a reason to at least say, look, that is the goal. We may never get there, but at least let's have that as a goal. Just the same way that, let's say, somebody who is answering questions on a test may say that their goal is never to get a wrong answer. Is that really possible? No. Of course, there's nobody who could always get right answers on every test, but still, we may as a student say that's my goal. And thinking of that as a goal also opens up our minds to what would that be like? What would we have to do to get there? What would it feel like to be without stress? And I think we can come to some understanding of that because all of us have moments, maybe even longer than a moment, but at least moments that are stress-free, moments where we feel filled with kindness, moments where we feel that we have undertaken a sort of a wise approach to some problem in our lives. And if we can see that for a moment, then at least we can understand what it is we're looking for. If we think of expanding that moment into 2 moments or into 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it might be, then we can at least come to an in-principle kind of understanding of what that kind of perfected state might be like. Taking refuge in the Dhamma, and that's the second one, is in a sense deciding to undertake the path, because the Dhamma is the teaching of the Buddha in this context. That's what it means, I think. And so to take refuge in that means to undertake the path, and however we come to it. And of course, we all come to it from different angles. We all come to it from different backgrounds, and we all find things that are easier to achieve and other things that are harder to achieve. And we all interpret the path our own way. Nevertheless, when we say, okay, I take refuge in the Dhamma, what we mean to say is that undertaking the path is a certain kind of protective process that we undergo. Because there's a way in which undertaking the path of practice protects us from some of our worst impulses. I have a talk on the Eightfold Path, which I'll try to remember to link up somewhere here on the screen. That will give you an understanding, a quick understanding of what the path entails, at least in one of its most famous lists that the Buddha gives. But that kind of path, deciding to undertake that kind of path, means in particular that we will undertake certain, at least attempt to undertake certain kinds of ethical strictures, that we won't kill, we won't steal, we won't lie, we won't commit sexual misconduct. It will also mean that we're going to undertake certain kinds of meditative practices, that we are going to try to calm the mind when we can, that we're going to try to be mindful in our actions. And all of these are protective in their way. They protect us from our worst impulses. They protect us from some of our impulses that are less skillful. They're prone to promote harm to others or promote harm to ourselves. And so in that sense, taking refuge in the Dhamma is essentially protecting ourselves by deciding to undertake a certain kind of practice. And the third part is refuge in the Sangha, and the Sangha is the community. Now, there are various ways of understanding that community. One of the earliest ways is that the community was the community of monastic followers, in particular understood as perfected monastic followers. That is, the monastic followers who had achieved certain kinds of goals along the path. And this is to distinguish them from, let's say, the real monastic community in the world, which of course has certain aspects that are perhaps laudable, but other aspects that may be corrupted in various ways. And so I think if we understand, it was always understood that when you're taking refuge in the Sangha, in the monastic Sangha at least, that doesn't mean literally the people who are monks right now. What that means is some kind of perfected ideal. But the Sangha also includes lay people, traditionally includes monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen. And so the Sangha itself includes all of these. Now, some of us as secularists may not particularly be interested in the monastic Sangha per se, and be more interested in the lay Sangha or the lay community, the community of lay followers. And that's fine. However we see it is good for us. The point is that community is really one of the three pillars, one of the three legs of this three-legged stool that really keeps it up. And I think that we'll find that if we are practicing without the aid of a community, without being able to get together with like-minded people, that we're missing something. Now, that's not always the case, of course, and there are indeed some suttas in the early canon where the Buddha recommends that if you can't find anybody appropriate, then study alone. Then practice alone. There's one of the very, very earliest suttas of the Buddha's in the Sutta Nipata is called the Rhinoceros Horn Sutta, where the Buddha recommends that if you can't find anybody good to practice with, then walk alone like a rhinoceros. The Buddha also said, very, very famously, that friendship along the path was really the whole of the spiritual life. And whether we like the phrase spiritual life or not doesn't really matter to the point he's making. The point is that if you're practicing along a path like this, it really does help to have other people to bounce ideas off of. So I would certainly recommend searching out like-minded people, whether they're local, and I think the best, the optimal way to practice is locally, with people that you can see in front of you, the people you can meet with in the real world. Nevertheless, that may not be possible for some of us, and in that case, finding an online community can be also very fruitful. and the Secular Buddhist Association has online meetings every week or so, and so I would recommend those if you can't find a local place that you feel suitable in. And this kind of friendship is called in Pali Kalyana Mitata, or a person who's a friend is called a Kalyana Mitta. That is a spiritual friend or a friend that you find helps your practice, helps keep your practice going. And I think you'll find that if you have friends like these, they'll make practice easier and, in fact, make the whole process easier. So, I mean, essentially, to wrap this up in a large package, the three refuges can be seen as aspects of right intention, because by taking the three refuges, we are essentially making a certain kind of intention for ourselves. We're making the intention that we take the Buddha as a kind of an ideal towards which we strive. Whether or not it's possible to actually reach that goal, nevertheless, I think that can provide inspiration and, again, a kind of intention for us. Taking refuge in the Dhamma is, again, right intention. To say that I take refuge in the Dhamma is to say that I have this, that I make the intention within myself to practice in this way. And taking refuge in the Sangha is, again, a kind of protective, just as Dhamma is, it's a kind of an intention towards self-protection by associating with people who are similarly inclined to oneself, that can be of help, both in understanding what we're supposed to be doing and in practicing properly. Because I think we all know that we have a long way to go. Certainly I have a long way to go, and it can be of immense benefit to meet and get to know people who are farther along this path in whatever way they may be. So if you're interested in helping to make the world a wiser, a friendlier, and a less stress-filled place, do consider subscribing to Doug's Secular Dharma. We're going to have talks on aspects of early Buddhism and secular Buddhism just like this. So for yourself, do you take the refuges? How do you approach this question? I would be interested to know. Leave any of your comments or other questions in the section down below. And if you're new, welcome. If you're not new, and if you've been here a bunch of times, then really glad to see you here again. So thanks so much for being here, and I hope to see you next week on the next one of these episodes. Cheerio!